Black lives matter. Black lives matter to me. Black lives matter a lot to me. My name is Bob James. I'm a white jazz pianist and composer, and Black lives shaped my life. Black lives gave me a career. Black lives created the music that captured my heart. Black lives encouraged me. Black lives welcomed me into their unique indigenous jazz art form. Jazz was a black art form when I became obsessed with trying to learn it. And jazz is still and will always be a black art form. America is very lucky to have it. I feel very fortunate to have been accepted as a participant, a contributor. Early on, I remember thinking that the real jazz community was kind of a sacred, closed world. White folks better beware. But amazingly, Black lives in the jazz community let me join in. They could have pressed a knee into my neck, but they did not. They welcomed me and made it possible for me to live my dream, to play jazz in their world, where I was a minority. So I've lived a musician's life, surrounded by, nurtured by, and supported by Black lives. I'm proud to report today, June 8th, 2020, that I have zero regrets, only gratitude and love. Love for Black lives. Black friends make me feel relevant. Black musicians enrich my life. Black fans support my music. They applaud at my concerts. Sometimes they even shout out, "Go Bob," to give me confidence. They greet me warmly at the autograph table, buy me a drink at the bar, invite me to their homes. Black lives make me feel good about myself. Black lives matter to me. Thank you, Ron Brooks. Thank you, Omar Clay. Thank you, Quincy Jones. Thank you, Eric Dolphy. Thank you, Sarah Vaughan. Thank you, Milt Hinton. Thank you, Ben Riley. Thank you, Richard Davis. Thank you, Thad Jones. Thank you, Roberta Flack. Thank you, Gary King. Thank you, Eric Gale. Thank you, Idris Muhammad. Thank you, Ron Carter. Thank you, Harvey Mason. Thank you, Roz Mason. Thank you, Grover Washington Jr. Thank you, Pat Prescott. Thank you, Stanley Turrentine. Thank you, Ray Brown. Thank you, Jack DeJohnette. Thank you, Richard T. Thank you, Wilbert Longmire. Thank you, Johnny Hammond Smith. Thank you, Hank Crawford. Thank you, Hubert Laws. Thank you, Ralph McDonald. Thank you, Billy Cobham. Thank you, Buddy Williams. Thank you, George Benson. Thank you, Milt Jackson. Thank you, Lewis Johnson. Thank you, Hiram Bullock. Thank you, Earl Klugh. Thank you, Nathan East. Thank you, Marcel East. Thank you, Anita East. Thank you, Joe Sample. Thank you, George Butler. Thank you, Chris Jones. Thank you, Christian McBride. Thank you, Brian Blade. Thank you, El DeBarge. Thank you, Ruben Studdard. Thank you, Patty Austin. Thank you, Anita Baker. Thank you, Shante Moore. Thank you, Al Jarreau. Thank you, Luther Vandross. Thank you, Yogi Horton. Thank you, Leonard Doc Gibbs. Thank you, Freddie Hubbard. Thank you, Art Farmer. Thank you, John Faddis. Thank you, Kirk Whalum. Thank you, Ruby Whalum. Thank you, Marcus Miller. Thank you, Paul Jackson Jr. Thank you, Larry Braggs. Thank you, Chris Walker. Thank you, Von McDaniel. Thank you, Rob Swift. Thank you, Esperanza Spalding. Thank you, Richard Bona. Thank you, Jonathan Butler. Thank you, Al Turner. Thank you, Ron Otis. Thank you, Perry Hughes. Thank you, Dave McMurray. Thank you, Wayne Gerard. Thank you, Billy Kilson. And thank you, James Genus. Thank you, Questlove. Thank you, Nate Phillips. Thank you, Patrick Williams. Thank you, Tom Braxton. Thank you, Jay Williamson. Thank you, Justin Lee Schultz. Thank you, Tracy Franklin. Thank you, George Franklin. Thank you, James Adkins. Gee, I hope you get the idea. That's just off the top of my head. Trust me, there are many, many more in my life. Black lives matter to me.